Stress can help me rise to the challenge. Stress can help me connect with others. Stress can help me learn and grow. Those three statements, they've been ringing in my head nonstop since reading The Upside of Stress by Kelly McGonigal, who was on the podcast last episode talking about the upside of stress and how we can change our mindset towards stress and help our players change their mindset. Just think about this. Like, what if we could, instead of being broken down by stress, adversity, and challenges, what if we could harness the power of the stress, adversity, and challenges that is going to be natural in our lives and within any team? And what if we could harness that power and use it to bring out our athletes' best performances and to bring them closer together through any season? I believe this is one of the most important things we can do for our athletes and for people today, right? To change the path that we are headed on when it comes to mental health. We need to educate people better because I think there's a lot of misinformation out there around stress, challenges, and we need to help people to shift their mindset towards stress so they can embrace it, to grow from it, to thrive on it, to connect with others through the many stresses that we're going to experience. And that's what we're going to get into today in part 2 of our conversation with Dr. Kelly McGonigal. How to use stress that is only natural, how to use it for our benefit, the benefit of our team and the individuals on it. Welcome back to the Coaching Culture Podcast. My name is JP Nurbin, and I am joined by Nate Sanderson, my co-host and friend. I founded TOC Culture Consulting back in 2017 and started this podcast as well with the mission to help coaches become better leaders and to build better team cultures. And that's what we're all about. Be sure to check out my latest book, The Culture System. If you haven't already, it's going to give you so many practical ways to be a better leader and to grow your team's culture. You can get a free chapter at tocculture.com by subscribing to our newsletter. Our newsletter, it gives you the notes to every episode of the podcast as well. So well worth checking that out at tocculture.com. Now, if you haven't listened to part 1 of our conversation with Kelly McGonigal, you need to check it out. Today's episode starts in the middle of our conversation, and we're talking about how stress can help us connect. So instead of fight or flight, it's tend and befriend, as she calls it. It's instead of fight or flight, it's to flock, right? To flock to and flock with others.
Well, I think that point about connection is interesting because as you were talking there, I was thinking back to, some of the stories that we've tried to use to define that transition into freshman basketball. For us, going from middle school to high school for the first time, it's obviously not the same at the college level, but it's definitely different from going to 8th grade, 9th grade, and that sort of thing. And I think back to probably the best teammate that I've ever coached. And at the time, we were trying to normalize the struggle, right? And so we had kids come in and they talked at our parent meeting about what it was like to be a freshman and the academic adjustment and the time schedule and the longer season. And because we were trying to get parents to understand that it's a little bit different and that's okay. And that's normal. And I remember Macy sharing this story about when she became a freshman and then toward the end of the year, she got called up to varsity. And she said, she was scared and she was nervous and she didn't want to make a mistake and, all those things. And she said, but Amanda, the one senior, came alongside her and she just took care of her those last 3 weeks when she was wearing a varsity uniform and how much that made a difference. And as Macy was sharing that story with our freshmen, she just followed it with, and that's what I want to be for you. So if you guys run into anything, and so she became the one that took the freshmen to their cars after practice. And when they were frustrated, you'd see Macy with her arm around them, and so again, I think you're exactly right when it comes to there can be some intentionality in finding the right stories and then putting them in the right context with the right people that can be really, really powerful for preparing a whole group to face, those kinds of things.
And then here's the last bit that story needs is somebody in that situation needs to look at the youngest people in the room and say, and someday you're going to be that person. That's when somebody like that actually gives people the perspective to endure a lot of the uncertainty. Is if you can create this almost like a future memory. I've heard this from so many people in situations, actually some pretty dire situations where somebody helped them. And in that moment, it was somebody who had been through it before, right? So somebody who'd been through this crisis before, part of their story was helping someone else go through it. And the person who's going through it now not only receives that help, but has this like flash image that someday I will have gotten through this and I'm going to be the one lending a hand to support somebody else who's going through it. When you have a sense of yourself as like that kind of narrative, that kind of story, it's so empowering. And particularly for young people, it's really hard to connect to your future self in a way that is that visceral. So like if you can do anything to create that image, that felt sense, like this is true and I'm telling you that you're going to be that person to somebody else, it's such that kind of future memory can be so important. And it's true for anything too. I mean, like anything you want people to be able to imagine about the future, to literally have them imagine that future self-defining moment, um, can be a real source of strength.
One of the cool things is that interventions are short sometimes, like really
Mm-hmm.
short, and have huge impact months later in the research.
Yeah, or years later, like
Yeah.
that intervention I mentioned was affecting people's GPA when they graduated 4 years later. And then they actually followed up and was like, hey, do you remember the study you did freshman year? The majority of people were like, I do remember doing a study. I can't remember what it was about. And yet it had had this big impact on things like whether or not people found a mentor at the university, how they made sense of the stress and the challenges that they went through. I mean, they tracked them in pretty interesting ways, all the way to their GPA when they were graduating. And so I think that like even just so somebody listening to this conversation now, we've done the intervention. This already is an intervention. We've done as much as needs to be done. It is quite possible that somebody listening to this podcast will completely forget that they ever listened to it, have no idea who like I am. They don't need to read the book. And for some people, the next time something stressful happens, something they heard in this conversation is going to somehow be a part of what they're thinking and aware of. It's going to change the way they respond to it. I can guarantee it, because that's what's so cool about these mindset interventions is we're saying things that are true, but that sometimes can be hard to remember when life is difficult. And so we're just making it easier to remember. What a lot of times, like as you started out by saying, people already know that this stuff is true. It's in every religion, it's in every philosophy, it's in all of our favorite films and books. This idea that stress is part of the human experience, and we are capable of using that stress to be better, to do good in the world. Like we are capable. And also, we don't have to do these things alone.
Mm. You've, I feel like this is a little bit of therapy for me today. I'll be honest with you, because so much of the book I read when that you talk about those three responses, kind of engage, connect or tend and befriend,
Mm-hmm.
to others, and then the growth mindset, learn, and I think for me, I'm probably really good in stress to engage, to take action. I read that, I'm thinking Michael Jordan, I'm thinking Tiger Woods, the big game. Like I'm making all the connections, I'm making it into my life. And then when it comes to the connect, the tend to befriend, I'm thinking about the teams that I work with. But as you kind of just keep prodding back to that, like it's a three-prong approach. Though I really like the joy one as well you brought up, but like I'm so bad at this. When I get stressed, I want to engage. I want to take it all over. And it's like this sense of pride. I don't know if it's a man thing, but I'm so bad at looking to my wife and asking for her for help. But then I get resentful and bitter, and it's just this whole
I
thing.
know. Okay, you want to hear? I totally relate. I had to tell you, so I've been going through some challenges, and people have been trying to help me, and I'm literally saying to people, "Leave me alone." Like me, also somebody who except unlike you, I had to work really hard to get good at engaging with the challenge because of anxiety. My strength is making meaning. Once it's happened, I can make meaning out of anything. I will find a way to reframe it, turn it into, service and helping others. But to let people support me, or even just to find courage to do things that are stressful, that's been really hard to develop. So I think it's great that you are recognizing that there are some stress habits you have that are strengths, You can rely on them when you need them. And there are these other coping strategies that don't always come naturally to us. And part of what it means to be good at stress is to see how we can sometimes undermine these natural human strengths and be willing to think, okay, is this a moment where I really do need to let other people help me? And the way that I have been trying to do it is two ways. One is remember that when you are able to help someone else, especially someone you care about, it's really empowering. That this is something, an important gift we need to give the people in our lives. They need to be able to help us. They need to be able to support us. It's meaningful. It's part of what it means to be in relationships. And so it's not just about them helping us. We're vulnerable, we're weak, we need, we're a burden or whatever is going on in there. It's about letting other people have a full experience of their own strengths and what they have to offer. And then the other thing is, I have to set boundaries on it. Like I tell people, do not give me advice. Do not send me Google links about all the worst things that can happen. That's how people in my life show me they care. They send the horror Google links. I'm like, I found those already. Don't you know me? I don't need those. Send me something else. Send me cat videos and heart emojis, So part of it is also letting people know, what does it mean to support you? So hopefully you and your wife are navigating that.
We are. It's a work in progress. I said it today. I said it this afternoon. My reflection. I said, I'm feeling stressed. Just need you to know that. And it's just a little help here. So I feel good about that. Here's another quick question on this, and then I want to talk about the joy of movement, because there's so much good stuff in that book as well too. But this whole intervention, I think it's great. People read the book or they listen to this podcast, or they do an activity with their team. I think that's awesome. I'm curious, is there any daily rituals or practices that are really good for a coach within their own life? Because the life of a coach is so stressful. And then maybe even teaching it to athletes and players. Like, what are some really good rituals here that we could take on?
One that I do every day. So this might be more for your coach. I don't know if how like teenagers when they wake up is probably not their peak moment, but the coach is listening. Maybe try this. Before I get out of bed every morning, I think about my values, and I talk about values affirmation as a really incredible intervention in the book. But it's basically just thinking about what you care about most or what you want to bring to the world. And every day when I wake up, I think about what the day is going to look like, my prediction. And I think, like, what aspect of myself do I really want to bring to this? Is it courage? Is it enthusiasm? Is it like yesterday? It was making the most of it. Yesterday was a complicated day. I was like, Kelly, my value today is you are going to make the best of things, and to bring that part of you to every moment. But it could also be, values can also be just who and what you care about most. Like today, I'm a mentor, and that's what matters most. And I'm going to think about being the best mentor I can be. So there's lots of ways to think about what your values are. But we know that when people connect to their values, it creates the right emotions, the right physiology, the right ways of engaging with challenges that makes all of the best possible outcomes more likely. So whenever you might think to do it, that's a really good one. Another one that I'm very enthusiastic about is using music to connect to mindset. Music is one of the most effective ways to change your mindset and your mood. It's like a drug. And so I think every person should have playlists, and maybe every team should have a playlist that includes songs that remind them of what they most need to be reminded of, or an attitude they want to be able to connect to in important moments. So, you can have your hype song, but also what's the song you listen to when you're disappointed and you need to reframe it and think about that as part of the journey. What's the song that makes you feel like what you're choosing to do in your life matters? Like it depends on what you need to be reminded of. I've been listening to this genre of music called epic hip hop, which is pretty amazing. I don't know if you know this type of music. It's hip hop combined with like film score music. And it's just so amazing. It's got like all of the stress mindsets together. You rise to the challenge, but then it's also about connecting to others. And there's this, great uplifting surge. And, anyways, so that's something I would definitely encourage folks to do.
I think that's interesting. You talk about the sort of the dramatic music that happens in these movie scenes, and we started playing around with that a little bit with our game film. And we're coming
Oh,
back to show
yeah.
the good things that we've done in practice and or overcoming, some kind of obstacle or something like that. And so we've played around with that in some ways. We always have the same three songs we play pregame, and things like that. But yeah, I think there's an untapped potential there
Yeah.
with music for
I mean,
sure.
heck, if you're gonna have three songs, you should have one song that's about rising to the challenge, like your hype, whatever song. Have a song that reminds you that you're a team, that you're doing it together. I was talking to one coach. He used the song "We Are Family" for a team that he was training, a collegiate team, and then have a song that's something about learning and growing or meaning, right? Something that's bigger than self. Oh, that would be such a good playlist.
Well, we would be irresponsible if we didn't take a few minutes here to talk about your newest book. And I wonder, just for our audience, we've had Dr. Bruce Perry on the podcast before, and he's talked about in a therapeutic sort of trauma context, the importance of movement in connection. And I wonder if you could just give us a synopsis a little bit here of the joy of movement and what you've kind of discovered in your research there.
Yeah. So part of this is because movement has been such an important part of my life since I was a kid. It's one of the first things I learned is that exercise really helped me deal with anxiety and stress. Because I grew up at a time, 70s and 80s, where kids were not in therapy. Nobody was talking about this stuff. It was sort of like help yourself if you can. And I found that exercise was really important for me and my mental health. Um, and also, I have been a fitness professional for more than 20 years. So I teach like 10 exercise classes a week, and it's absolutely the best part of my day. Um, but so I say that the main concept of the book is that physical activity, whether it's sports, running, swimming, dancing, cycling, gardening, however you want to do it, that it is one of the most important things you can do if you want to be happier, if you want to feel more connected to others, and you want more meaning in life. And this is completely independent of the things people often think about, like losing weight or being physically healthier. That movement is a source of joy and hope and purpose and community, and you can choose to think about it that way. It really is an argument about, so often we're used to thinking about exercise as a way to punish people or to make up for indulging in things that we enjoy, like food or drink, or something we have to do because we had a heart attack or we don't want to have a heart attack. But if you actually pay attention to your experience, almost everyone can find a form of movement that makes them feel good about themselves, that either feels good while they're doing it or it feels amazing when they have done it. That sometimes they're different. That puts them in places that inspire them, whether it's nature or like a training gym, or creates communities that support them. And so that's the essential message of the book, and that it doesn't matter also what body you have, that this is true across the lifespan. It's true for people of every physical ability or disability, people with challenges to mobility. It's something that everyone has access to. That was another thing that I think is really important, because a lot of times when we talk about exercise and movement, people think if you're not young and fit already, it's not for you.
You mentioned in there that a lot of people associate exercise with like punishment. I really
Mm-hmm.
would blame, I'm going to blame sports for that, because I feel
Sometimes when
like,
PE
yeah, it's like,
can
oh,
be.
take a lap, you haven't done it, or hit the line and run. And that's one of the many reasons I'm a huge advocate of alternative consequences to, conditioning in sports, and talked about that loads in the podcast. But I'm curious, from your research, I know you're not big into sports and team sports and all that, but I'm curious, from all things you learn in your research around movement, what is organized sports potentially missing out? I don't know if like if you're enough in there, but I'm just curious, what is
I
the
have looked at
organized
the research a
sports?
little
Yeah.
bit.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. So organized sport, one thing is whether it's a individual sport or a team sport. So if you're looking at things like mental health and emotional benefits and psychological well-being, Team sports are often one of the best forms of physical activity across the lifespan. So if you actually want to help someone experience joy from movement, team sports are amazing. And that's particularly in young people compared to individual sports, where you can see more kids at risk for mental health challenges, eating disorders, that sort of thing, where it's like there's so much focus on your individual performance and whether it's good enough. That can be a really tricky place for a lot of folks. Whereas on team sports, sometimes, you get the right environment, the right team, the right coach, and all of that. And there's less of that kind of risk for kids. Um, one of the Some of the studies that I've seen that look at what can go wrong versus what can go right. One is creating an environment where people on the team are constantly being compared to each other, versus a kind of empowering coaching context where people are not being pit against each other or ranked or you probably know this better than I do. I'm probably not explaining it right, but there's a way of creating a team environment that is more interdependent as opposed to competitive within the team. And that seems to be really important for helping everyone on the team experience benefits. And even often it's the best athletes who are most at risk when the opposite is true. It's the ones who are really, really good who actually suffer in a situation where people are pit against each other, or you can like lose your status, as opposed to that more like true interdependence. So that's one thing that could be missing. But I got to tell you, I mean, like there's tons of research on how helpful it is. So I don't want to, in some ways, I almost don't want to focus on the greatest risks, because I think, the more people can be involved across the lifespan in team sports, probably the better. People
Well, let
really
me ask,
miss it too. There's a big drop off in physical activity when teenagers go to college, because exercising is not as fun as being on a team. There's so much that you get from being on a team. And, the rest of us in the fitness industry are trying to figure out, how do we make it as meaningful and fun and structured and all of that, and get your family to cheer you on. I mean, like, wouldn't it be great if every time you did a workout, there was like a cheering squad? There's a lot of stuff that would be great to carry over.
let me ask you a different version of that question, and I'm just curious here. But if you could have a magic wand, and touch every coach in our audience and say, here's the one thing I wish coaches better understood or could do for themselves or for their athletes, what would be the one thing, that you wish that everybody could be better at when it comes to the way that we interact with young people?
I will tell you what, I don't know if everyone else could be better at it, but the thing that is such a gift, if you can do it, is to decide that your orientation is going to be to see the good in others and the potential in others. And so that way, any constructive feedback that you're giving, any criticism, any guidance, it is from a place of truly seeing the good. And I don't mean like some fantasy, make it up, I see the good in everyone can be anything. There's a way of looking at the world where you're really paying attention to people's strengths and capacities. And you can choose to have a lens where you're like a detective for it. This is who this person really is. This is what makes them come alive. This is how they can grow. It's a skill you can strengthen. But, as a teacher and a mentor in a lot of different contexts, this has been the most empowering for me as well, because it changes your relationships with people, and it still allows you to be a great coach, teacher, instructor, mentor. But there's something about choosing to see the good in others, like you are a detective for it, that it changes the meaning of so much of what you do. So I would encourage any coach, if that hasn't been sort of on their radar, to think of that as their number one job.
Well, and I love that. And that actually, when we think about the three purposes of our basketball program that we lay out for our parents and our players, number three is I want our players to graduate with an understanding that they have been uniquely created to make this world a better place. And so, one, we're trying to help them discover that in the context of team. But I think you're exactly right. There's a responsibility on me as the head coach, on my staff, to be oriented toward we're helping them to figure that out, right? Whether they're, regardless of what they do with the ball, good, bad, athletic or not, that there's value in who they are and that they bring to the team, that maybe they, especially with young people, don't even necessarily see in themselves yet. And so I think that's an amazing perspective. I appreciate you sharing that.
All right, that's it for our conversation with Kelly McGonigal. I highly recommend The Upside of Stress and The Joy of Movement. I've enjoyed them both. Just incredibly powerful reads. My mindset shifted for sure by reading The Upside of Stress, and it's without a doubt been very, very helpful for me. Be sure to subscribe to our newsletter this week if you haven't already. Head on over to tocculture.com. Like I said, you can also get my book there, The Culture System, as well as notes to this week's podcast. Thanks again for listening in.